a mega project in which more than 150 countries participated. A project that promised the construction of new airports, motorways, and seaports. A project that showed dreams of creating the next Dubai and Singapore. But today, in many of these same countries, these mega projects remain incomplete and those dreams lie shattered. Some are buried under heavy debt, while others stand as ruins. This was China's largest global mega project, known as the Belt and Road Initiative. There was a time when it was called the project of the century. But today, many describe it as a geopolitical disaster, and the countries that suffered the most are the poorer nations that were shown these grand dreams. So what exactly went wrong that people are now questioning a superpower like China? Welcome once to GlobalCast TV. In 2013, when China's President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, it was considered one of the most ambitious plans of the century. The goal was to revive a modern Silk Road, connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe through railways, highways, and ports. China's mission was to bring development to poorer countries and present itself as a global leader. This vision amazed the world. More than 140 countries showed interest, and many developing nations quickly began taking loans from China. Within a short time, China invested around $1.2 trillion into this project. However, this money was given in the form of loans to countries that Western banks or the International Monetary Fund had considered too risky to lend to. But soon, the reality of BRI began to emerge. It was not just an infrastructure project, it also served China's geopolitical and economic agenda. China's industrial capacity had grown massively. Every year, thousands of engineers were graduating, but it was becoming difficult to provide them jobs within China. So, China planned to export its workforce and expand its geopolitical influence. The strategy was simple: provide loans to developing countries for BRI projects, and then use Chinese companies and workers to complete those projects, benefiting its own economy. One of the biggest criticisms of BRI is debt trap diplomacy. This means giving such large loans to poorer countries that they struggle to repay them, and in return, are forced to hand over land or key infrastructure. The most famous example of this is Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan leaders were shown dreams that building a new port on the Indian Ocean could turn the country into a regional trade hub like Dubai. However, Sri Lanka already had the Colombo port, which functioned as a transshipment hub. China encouraged them to build a new deep-sea port along major shipping routes from the Strait of Malacca to the Suez Canal. This project became the Hambantota port. Sri Lanka took a loan of $1.3 billion from China. One key condition was that only Chinese firms would construct the port. While the interest rate was relatively low, there was a major risk. If Sri Lanka failed to repay the loan, China could take control of the project. The port was built, but it never performed as expected. Studies showed that there was little actual need for it. At one point, only 30 to 40 ships visited the port annually. Since the port wasn't generating revenue, repaying the loan became impossible. Eventually, in 2017, Sri Lanka had to lease the port to a Chinese company for 99 years. Today, the revenue goes to China, and Sri Lanka effectively lost control over a strategic asset. But Sri Lanka was not the only country caught in this situation. The African nation of Zambia, heavily dependent on copper exports, also fell into this trap. Its leaders aimed to modernize the economy and took Chinese loans to fund various projects. They were told that loans from the IMF and Western countries come with strict conditions, but they overlooked the risks associated with Chinese loans, particularly clauses that could lead to asset seizure in case of default. By 2020, about 43% of Zambia's total debt was owed to China. Then, in November 2020, due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, trade and tourism collapsed, and copper demand dropped. As a result, Zambia defaulted on its debt. BRI also led to the creation of several white elephant projects, large and expensive developments that serve little practical purpose. One example is Montenegro. In 2014, Montenegro took a $1 billion loan from China to build the Bar-Bolgar Highway. However, poor planning led to massive cost overruns. Construction began by cutting through mountains, but the budget was exhausted after building just a small section. Today, only about 41 kilometers of road exists, and it doesn't even connect to a meaningful destination. This short stretch alone cost so much that it shook the country's entire economy. Montenegro's debt rose to nearly 80% of its GDP, forcing the country to seek help from the International Monetary Fund and the European Union. Near Hambantota Port, Sri Lanka also built an airport to encourage development in the surrounding area. The Matala Rajapaksa International Airport was constructed at a cost of $200 million, funded through Chinese loans. However, neither airline showed interest nor did passengers arrive. Today, this airport is often called the world's emptiest airport because flights are extremely rare. In fact, animals like elephants are sometimes seen roaming on its runway. On the west coast of South America lies a small country called Ecuador, which also fell into the BRI trap. To solve its energy crisis, it partnered with China to build the Coca-Codo Sinclair Dam, a $2.6 billion project. However, during construction, Chinese contractors reportedly ignored quality standards, and later it was revealed that officials were bribed to overlook issues. As a result, more than 17,000 cracks have appeared in the dam structure. Today, the project is at risk of collapse at any time. Then came the case of Pakistan. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, a $60 billion initiative, was expected to bring electricity, jobs, and development to Pakistan. However, many projects were delayed or failed. People in Gwadar protested against water shortages, electricity issues, and Chinese involvement. Promises of jobs were not fulfilled, and the country's debt continued to rise. Now, the situation is such that Gwadar Port, which was once under Pakistan's authority, is effectively controlled by China. Around 91% of the revenue goes to Chinese companies, while only 9% remains with Pakistan. BRI suffered a major setback when Italy, the only G7 nation to join the initiative, announced its withdrawal. China had not provided direct loans to Italy, but had signed agreements promising investment and trade deals. However, most projects did not materialize, and Italy saw minimal economic benefit. Eventually, it called the decision a big mistake and exited BRI. Apart from Italy, countries like Malaysia, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Nepal also canceled or renegotiated several BRI projects. In response to these challenges, the United States and Europe launched alternative initiatives, such as the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment and the Global Gateway. These programs promise more transparent and lower interest financing to help countries avoid falling into debt traps. However, this situation has also strengthened ties between China and Russia. After the war with Ukraine, Russia became increasingly isolated and moved closer to China through initiatives like BRI. This is contributing to the formation of a new geopolitical axis that could challenge American dominance. After a decade and trillions of dollars in spending, the Belt and Road Initiative is now being described by many as one of the biggest foreign policy failures in modern history. The main reason for this failure is that BRI was not purely about development. It was largely driven by China's own interests. China aimed to export its excess industrial capacity, secure access to raw materials, and expand its geopolitical influence. Additionally, many of the loans were issued in Chinese yuan, as China also wanted to promote its currency globally. Today, BRI stands at a turning point. China is rebranding it as BRI 2.0, with a stronger focus on digital infrastructure, green energy, and sustainable development. However, the world is no longer willing to rely solely on promises. Countries are now more cautious and are likely to accept only those projects that provide real economic benefits, rather than increasing debt burdens. The key question is, while many countries suffered losses from BRI, did China benefit from it? The answer is mixed. China did not fully achieve its goal of expanding global control. Instead, it faced criticism for debt trap diplomacy, which damaged its global image. Its own economy has also slowed down, and it now bears the burden of recovering massive loans and managing acquired projects. On the other hand, China has gained stakes, directly or indirectly, in more than 100 ports worldwide, which supports its export-driven economy. If the full BRI network is ever completed, it would create the longest connected trade route across Asia, Europe, and beyond, potentially covering around 65% of the world's population. Thank you for your support and kind comments. Don't forget to like and share. See you in the next amazing video.